you that they are only merely trying to exist. And if they don't evacuate local populations, then the poor people who migrate to live there in that land will have nowhere else to go. They've done an amazing job convincing you and the world that they are not a European colonial settler reality, and that they belong to the land and the land belongs to them, when neither their parents nor their grandparents or their great-great-great-great-great-parents had nothing to do with that land other than a thought from a religious text. They've done an amazing job convincing you and the world that there's some boogeyman out there, out to get them. And if they don't kill innocent people in the process of trying to get that boogeyman, then somehow the boogeyman's going to come and get you too. They've done an amazing job convincing you and others of their lie of never again, when their never agains are selective and they are recurrent and continual perpetrators of never agains. They've done an amazing job convincing you and the world that if you speak up against their evils, if you call out their injustices, then you are anti-Semitic, that you hate Jewish people, that you hate Judaism. And in this past 329 days, they've done an amazing job convincing you and the world that history began on October 7th. And any attempt to talk about root causes or anything before October 7th somehow makes you anti-Semitic. Because they have been doing such an amazing job in these fields, because they've done such an amazing job convincing you of these lies, that in these past 76 years, updated for inflation, these yet-to-be United States has offered Israel $310 billion in aid, military and otherwise. The number 2 country has gotten half of that. This is because they've been able to fool you. And none of this could have taken place without you, without me. Zionism is powerless without the grand forces of evangelical Christianity and American and Western imperialism and your and my dollars that flood their country, offering them a rubber stamp for all of the evils they commit. You are all, we are all, paying for that severe disease that we've all contracted called selective amnesia. And don't get it twisted, some among us are just guilty of genocide. But the rest of us suffer from that selective amnesia, and this is such a common truth for those of us in these yet-to-be United States. If you think about so much of what we've been a part of, we selectively tend to forget when it doesn't fit our narrative. So here's the structure of our day today, because the reality is that we need to act. The reality is that we need to organize. And the reality is that we need to have conversations. So I'm thankful for the conversation that we're all going to have tonight with these amazing panelists to my left. And here is the structure of how tonight will play out so that you can follow along. First, I'm going to introduce each speaker. And each speaker is going to have 4 minutes to offer their opening remarks. After that, we have some crafted questions for each of our panelists that we will ask them. Each answer is timed. Each of our panelists have the same number of minutes, the 4 minutes at the beginning, 2 questions, 1 for 4 minutes, 1 for 3 minutes. So they all have the proper and correct and fair times. And then I will offer a few closing remarks, and then we are going to be blessed with some poetry. And after a short poem, we will open up for questions from the audience. There's 2 ways you can ask those questions. You can ask them by standing up and asking after we've called on you. Or number 2, you can write them down on the index cards. Gloria, did we get the index cards out to everyone? No? Maybe? Possibly? Gloria, do we have index cards? Index cards? All right, X day on the index cards. If you feel like you don't want to ask the question, then write it down on something else and we'll get it out to you. So I'm going to join this panel over there and introduce each of them. So while I go over there, please give them all a great hand of applause. All right, I'm going to do these introductions in alphabetical order, but you will see that we have placed our two Palestinian activists in the centers of the tables. As we center their voices, we also visually center their voices here this evening. First, I would like to introduce Mr. Antonio Gonzalez, the founder of AIM West, the American Indian Movement West. As a Vietnam veteran, Antonio lived the horror of war and was inspired to work for human rights. Antonio began community organizing with organizations such as Fresno Community Action and the Children's Rights Group in San Francisco. In 1982, Antonio began working with the International Indian Treaty Council, the first indigenous NGO in the United Nations, and eventually became a UN liaison. Antonio currently hosts KPF Radio's Bay Narrative Circle and Across Indian Land, and is a TV host to Eagle and Condor at San Francisco BABC Media. Please give a welcome to Antonio Gonzalez.
Thank you, Rez. Good evening, my relatives. I extend my hand in friendship, and I'd like to give an acknowledgement to the indigenous peoples of this land and territory who have struggled, and many still survived. So, my relatives, with that introduction, a little bit about myself. I am from Fresno proper, born here in the General Hospital, and living out in a farm worker community in Malaga. And I also went through a lot of foster homes here in Fresno County. And it's through that I learned a lot about myself. And I also graduated right here at Fresno High School, just trying to qualify a little bit to you about myself. And I was in and out of juvenile hall. Don't get me wrong either. I was kind of trying to survive in these foster homes, where I also learned to lie. But I also graduated, and immediately I was drafted, and I was in the war in Vietnam. 1968, I graduated in 67, June. And by January, I had gotten my draft notice. And by September, I was already flying into Vietnam, trained in the infantry. And it was through those experiences in 68 and 69. I also became a disabled veteran. I was wounded twice there. And it was the second time I got wounded that I started getting woke. And I was a staunch Catholic. I was an altar boy out in St. Anthony's in one of the foster homes, but after the second time I got wounded, I tell you, I had a long talk with Jesus Christ, and I told him I think I'm on the wrong side. And I started thinking about my own survival after that. And coming home, I was aimless, and years later, after working here in Fresno County Community Action, helping start school breakfast programs later on with the Children's Rights Group, I came across the American Indian Movement. And that's where, in a sense, I got my spirituality back. I felt I came back into the circle of life. Here are some people that can teach me who I am and where I came from. And so it's through that those experiences in the American Indian movement. I also worked with the American Indian movement in the international arena. And I was there in 1983, starting with the Working Group on Indigenous Population. And on through the years to the present, I'm still working there with the UN somewhat as an NGO, as an Indigenous Peoples organization. But it's through those experiences and learning about the issues. I met international leaders worldwide to the moment. I was in Beirut, Lebanon, 1980, and I was with the PLO. I was invited by the Red Crescent from the Palestinian National Congress. So it's through those experiences I'm trying to share with you, learning more about Chicanismo and about my Indianness. And today, in the U.S. Census in the United States, as of 2010 census, there are 5 tribes, large tribes in the United States. And first of all, it's the Choctaw, the Cherokee, the Navajo, the Sioux, and Mexican American Indios. That's right, 175,000 in the census. So we've come a long way evolving. Thank you, my relatives.
Thank you. All right, again, we are going in alphabetical order. So our next panelist is Mr. Seth Morrison. Seth Morrison has held leadership posts in various local, regional, and national Jewish organizations and is currently active in Jewish Voice for Peace and JVP Action, where he serves on the National Board of Directors. With the Jewish Voice for Peace Bay Area chapter, Seth facilitates their legislative work group. In 2011, he resigned from the Washington, D.C. Board of the Jewish National Fund in protest over repeated evictions of Palestinians from their homes in East Jerusalem. He chaired the Washington, D.C. Metro chapter of J Street before becoming active in the BDS movement. Morrison has contributed a chapter to the book Reclaiming Judaism from Zionism, a collection of autobiographical essays describing how American Jews disentangled themselves from the distortion of Zionism. Please give a hand for Mr. Seth Morrison.
Thank you all, and it's really an honor for me to be here with so many wonderful activists and all of you. When I first was contacted by Dan, he said, you know, we're not sure how many people will show up, but this is important. And I said, I'll come, and now look at it. It's really, really very impressive. So, Jewish Voice for Peace is the largest Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the world. We have about 800,000 supporters in the U.S. and close to 100,000 here in California. During the last 10, 11 months, we have driven 2.5 million phone calls and emails. That's just through our own platforms to try to stop this genocide. My personal story is that I grew up on Long Island in a relatively assimilated Jewish home. But while we were very assimilated, we were also involved in the Jewish community. My sisters and I went to Hebrew school as well as public school. And throughout that period, we were, and I can say it now, brainwashed about Israel in 2 ways. One is the great heroes of the Jewish people who have conquered the land and doing all this great work, but we were also brainwashed to be paranoid. We were a small Jewish community in a suburban village, And so, of course, we interacted with many people in the town. We went to public schools. And our parents encouraged my sisters and I to be outgoing, to make friends, to be involved in the community. But they also said, you know, if they're not Jewish, we can't really trust them. Be friendly with them, interact with them, but they'll stab you in the back. Wow. And all that comes from the Holocaust and from a very long history of anti-Semitism in the U.S. You know, I can tell you stories from my parents and my grandparents. They all experienced anti-Semitism much worse than my sisters and I, because, you know, growing up in the 50s, 60s, America was a very different place. So anti-Semitism is real. But as we heard in the introduction, the Zionist community, which includes both Christian Zionists and Jewish Zionists, has done a wonderful job of using our American system. And, you know, we know our country is very flawed in many ways, but we are also, you know, in some ways a representative democracy. And our people have used that to build this myth about Israel. And I'm proud to be here today to disclaim that myth.
Our third panelist this afternoon is Faisal Naser. Faisal Naser is a second-generation refugee that originated in Gaza. This is his bio. Israel doesn't recognize Faisal as a Palestinian, therefore he grew up without a country, but merely a resident in the countries he lived in. Faisal settled in the United States and now works here in Fresno, the city that sends $6 million of his tax money to bomb his relatives. Faisal?
First of all, just a little correction here, I am a third-generation immigrant. Neither my parents nor my grandparents had a country that claimed them as citizens. Today, I am a U.S. citizen, and it saddens me what my country is doing. See, for me, what drew me to this country is the freedom of expression, the freedom to protest and to assemble, the freedom to criticize. Unfortunately, all that went out the door when it came into Gaza. An example of this that we saw happening is what happened at the college campuses to protesters a couple of months ago. Gaza has proven that those values are intact as long as it doesn't cost too much. See, for us Palestinian Americans, we believed in those values deeply. I came here and stayed here because of those values. I studied, I worked because of those values. I am a good citizen. And the outcome? My tax dollars are funding the bombing of my immediate family members. My grandfather's home was destroyed in this war. My cousins, my people, they were bombed and injured. The U.S. has sent $26.5 billion in funds this year alone in aid to Israel. That's the only way that Israel has been able to sustain this genocide. That's enough money to run the city of Fresno for 17 years. We not only alleviated Israel's financial issues with our money, but we're the #1 weapons supplier. The latest batch was 2 weeks ago. See, 2 weeks ago, Blinken the Butcher approved $20 billion. Shame. $20 billion worth of weapons to Israel. Thus far, 500 airplanes filled with weapons were sent to Israel from our own tax dollars. We can't escape taxes. And this is why I feel obligated to tell you where your money is going. Fresno alone sends over $6 million of your money to Israel. What our government is doing is the worst kind of psychological torture I have been exposed to. Do we not have enough issues that require funding domestically? Are our politicians so detached from reality that they decided our money is better spent going to Israel? What about our healthcare? What about our aging infrastructure, homeless issues, drug issues, expensive colleges? Do you know that Israel has free healthcare? Do you know that Israel has no debt? Do you know that Israel offers free college education? Yet, we're saddled here with $35 trillion of debt. And our city of Fresno sends $6 million every year for Israel. Our entire nation sends $4 billion to Israel. It is both disgraceful and disrespectful to our intelligence for our representatives to treat our money as a tool to gain favor and power. What I used to think I have is survivor's guilt, but what I have is much worse. What I have is blood on my hands, on all our hands. It's been almost a year of genocide. We've seen beheaded babies. I'm here to let you know that you could do more and you could stop this genocide. Thank you.
Before I introduce the last two panelists, if you have an empty seat near you, raise your hand. We have a lot of people that don't have somewhere to sit. So if you're standing in the back, there's a lot of empty seats. Come on, fill the seats.
If you're young, get up and get the elder.
There you go, Gloria. All right, our fourth panelist this afternoon is Zeina Rose. Zeina is a Jordanian Palestinian American who grew up in Fresno. She received her BA in political science and her master's in special education. She's a special education teacher and a writer. Please give a warm welcome for Zeina.
Hi everyone. Again, my name is Zeina and I'm a Palestinian Jordanian American. I have family and friends in Jerusalem and the West Bank. My family I will speak about, inshallah, a little bit later. But because of the over 76 years of occupation and the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, in 2016, that was the first time I was able to see my family over there in person, and we've been rebuilding our familiar relationships since then. So I've also been working in Palestine almost every summer since 2017. I co-direct a summer camp where we teach students in grades K through 12 English, leadership skills, self-confidence, and community building. But another really big part of the camp is that we hire teachers internationally and we take them on political tours throughout the West Bank and Jerusalem so that they can return to their home countries prepared to serve as allies. And now we have a really big network of teachers that are educated on Palestine, building curriculum, and working on their individual classrooms every day. I'm here because I believe in the power of all people to liberate all people. It begins in small, powerful communities like ours. Recently, I got the opportunity to spend 1 hour a week teaching remotely to a few student refugees from Gaza. One told me she got cut off at the 3rd year of her time in university. Another told me 22 members of his family have been killed. These stories are only the beginning, and they're proof that liberation work needs to be passionate and effective long, long after a ceasefire is established. The genocide in Gaza is unfortunately one symptom of a long history of ethnic cleansing in Palestine. And while eyes are on Gaza, Israel has just launched its most invasive attack on the West Bank. Since October 7th, over 600 Palestinians in the West Bank have been killed to blind eyes and deaf ears. This comes after over 76 years of occupation, apartheid, murder, home demolishing, and illegal settlements, which they're building right now. What's worse, this isn't isolated to Palestine. Palestine is the tragic victim of collaborated international powers who share money and arms, as Faisal was talking about, in order to gain access to land. And they'll do anything, even kill they'll even kill the recognized number of 40,000 martyrs, which we know that number is much, much higher than what the international community recognizes it. And they'll kill those people in order to access that land. These international powers include the State of Israel and our government right here. While our unhoused population grows rapidly, our healthcare system declines, prices more than double to an unlivable wage, the US insists on taking more of our money to give to Israel, to kill Palestinians, and to take their land. I'm here because every community matters in liberation work. Our liberation is tied to Palestine's. The whole world is watching innocent people get taken hostage, their homes destroyed, developing diseases, starving, losing limbs, and getting killed. And we cannot remain silent like the international community has. Thank you.
You guys got in it tonight with these amazing panelists. And our final panelist of the evening is Dr. Joshua Shurley, the National Vice President of Veterans for Peace and the co-founder of the Fresno chapter. Joshua is an Army veteran, a former conflict researcher, and a peace activist. After serving as an infantry soldier during the 90s and early thousands, he went on to earn degrees in anthropology and security studies, and later a PhD in international relations. I wasn't going to read this, but it's interesting. His background includes extensive field research in East and Central Africa, examining the effects of U.S. military operations on local civilian populations, which was a major factor in his shift towards activism. In addition to teaching political science at Fresno City College and other area campuses, Josh is on the board of directors of the Fresno Center for Nonviolence. Please welcome Dr. Joshua Shurley.
Thank you, Razor. Thank you for having me here and being up here with all these powerful voices. It's humbling. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm currently with the National Leadership of Veterans for Peace. Veterans for Peace is an organization of military veterans and allies dedicated to exposing the true costs of war and militarism, and seeking justice not just for veterans, but for all victims of war. We're organized in over 100 active chapters across the United States and around the world, including a modest one here in Fresno in the Central Valley. We have a few of our folks here tonight. Antonio, who's worked with us for years, going back to the 80s. So as people whose bodies literally have been, in many ways, the instruments of national policy and misguided national policy, many like us in Veterans for Peace feel compelled to do something, to not remain silent or neutral. I have come to loathe that word and that concept, neutral, especially in the face of unquestionable horror and unspeakable violence. Neutrality just is not an option if one wants to keep their humanity intact. Not every veteran who feels regret for having taken part in U.S. actions abroad joins organizations like Veterans for Peace. Most do not. It's very difficult, actually, to get veterans to join causes like this. Because, as Reza kind of alluded to earlier, we are so conditioned, we are indoctrinated not to do such things, and that works, I think, doubly so for folks in the military. The first time I took part in any kind of a protest demonstration maybe a decade or so ago, after my time in the Army, it just felt wrong, it felt strange. Even though I knew 100% it was the morally correct thing to do, it was hard to shake that feeling like, it was somehow improper. But yeah, it forced me to examine, this notion of loyalty. What are we loyal to? Loyal to what? Loyalty to my sisters and brothers in uniform, certainly so. Loyalty to a system largely built on profit that pushes vulnerable teenagers into a war machine that chews them up and spits them out, and does far worse to populations around the world. Many of us say no. We're not loyal to that. Enough is enough. As Faisal mentioned, right? We have blood on our hands, and so many of us feel this enormous sense of responsibility to speak for those who have sacrificed and who have been sacrificed. Again, not just seeking justice for veterans, but for all victims of war. And while most veterans don't become active and visible in the pro-peace movement, I will tell you this: many, and these numbers are growing exponentially, many are increasingly recognizing that the U.S. posture in the so-called war on terror, and especially our unconditional support for the Israeli regime for this past year, is wrong. I mean, the numbers of folks, veterans, but also active duty military, who are expressing these opinions, usually privately, is growing, and it's something that I think we haven't seen since the Vietnam War era. So, for better or for worse, the voice of veterans in our society is highly regarded. I don't necessarily think it always should be that way. Thank Hollywood, thank the media, whatever, but people place a lot of stock in what veterans have to say. And so I think it's important that we leverage that voice as much as possible to steer us into a better tomorrow, a sane and rational policy, something that we can be proud of, something that we can actually feel pride in serving. So organizations like ours and others, many of the organizations represented here, represent to some degree voices of conscience, and it's humbling to be here, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
All right. Before we get to our questions, I want to do a couple things. First of all, give our entire panel a big round of applause for being with us tonight. And while we are honoring the people that are here to present to us, I want to tell you something. When we were here earlier, we were having conversations. Are there enough chairs? Is there too many chairs? Is it going to look empty? Do me a favor and just look around at how many people are here tonight. Look back. Look back. I want to tell you, there's 140 chairs out there. There's easily 165, 170 people here. So that's amazing. And with that said, let us ground ourselves a little bit before we get into some hard conversations. We didn't just show up here to use our body as some fodder for words being spewed from a dais, right? We came here to be together because we want to do something. We want to raise up together. So I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to look at somebody to your left or your right, and I want you to look at them, and I want you to just tell them, I see you. And I want the person to respond, and I see you. There's this beautiful concept called Sawubona, and it's kind of like, have any of you seen Avatar? Like the sea thing? This is a real concept. They've jacked that from cultures. But what it is it's about looking to the person to your left or right and actually acknowledging that there's another person that could have been doing something else tonight and decided to sit next to you to be able to learn about how they're contributing to the genocide in Gaza and what they can do to move forward and break those kinds of systems. So honor the people next to you. Honor them. Now look to the person person on the other side of you and I say, I see you. I see you.
I see you. I see you.
I'm gonna, Gloria. All right. Now that you've seen each other. Oh yeah. So I guess I've been told like 4 times already that there are restrooms. I think the gentleman's restroom is to your right and the ladies to your left. I think that's the way they told me. If not, figure it out. You'll be all right. And there are extra ones at the end of the corridor. At the end of the corridor, Chucho tells us. All right. Now we're going to get into the crafted questions. Each of these questions has a time limit. I will be keeping time. I'm going to give them a 10-second warning and I'm going to cut them off. Please don't think that I'm being rude when I ask somebody to move on to the next question, because we do have our timing. As we're doing that, you probably are formulating your own questions. So after the poet comes up here and spits 5 minutes of depth towards us, you will have a chance to ask questions. The rules for your questions are as follows, and I'll go over it again. No speeches. No sermons. Don't stand up and tell us who you are and why you got to where you're at and where you're going. Don't got time for it. Ask a question. And if you think that you can't control yourself, Gloria is walking around here with little pieces of paper that you can write your question on, so we can make sure that I don't have to cut you off, because that's not how I want to spend my afternoon. Our first question is for Zeina. Zeina, you have 4 minutes for the first question. Zeina, can you remind us of what your family endured during the Nakba and what brought you to this point today? And if you can, think about this also from the lens of women in both national life and resistance struggle as well.
Everybody else is fine. Who had their hand up? Thank you.
I won't use a mic next time.
It's perfect. I can hear you.
Okay, thank you. So first, to begin, I'm going to talk about a little bit of the history of women's role in the resistance movement. Women have played a huge part long before 1948. But I'm really going to focus on their role in the First Intifada in 1987, because a lot of what they did there carries over to today. So during that time, men were being primarily targeted by Israel. They were taken as political prisoners, killed, tortured, and so women were really holding down the fort, as we always do. But they didn't just protect their homes and their children. They organized and they mobilized other women. Huge movements. They were the backbone of the First Intifada, which means uprising in Arabic. So some things that they did is they put together clubs, and they would call them like knitting clubs or sewing or cooking. But behind closed doors, they were organizing campaigns. They were finding secret ways to connect to the prisoners to help them escape, like singing songs outside of the prison gates. They were also, they launched some of the first important boycott movements in Palestine, in Palestine. And they would also, while boycotting Israeli produce, they focused on self-sustainability, so they would grow their own farms, their own produce, and distribute that amongst themselves. When Israel shut down universities and schools, they would organize teach-ins. So and to this day, women are doing all of these things. They're leading the education movement, making sure that children of today still know what Palestine is and still know how they can serve their role as an ally and in solidarity. They're still running activist groups. They're still organizing teach-ins. They're still working in BDS campaigns. All of what we learned from the women in Palestine in 1987 is carried over to today. So they're a huge part of the liberation movement of Palestine. And on top of that, they carry the weight of the trauma that comes with an ethnic cleansing. So a lot of women will have to nurse their husbands to health when they come back from the prisons after being tortured and not being the same that they once were. They'll deal with organizing funerals. They will carry the children and teach them. And my family is one example of generational trauma that came out of the occupation. So my teta, which means grandma in Arabic, she was born in Jerusalem. My Sido's family, Sido means grandpa, all of his family is outside of Palestine. None of them are there. They all got expelled after 1948. They're from Tentura. There was a massacre there. 30 seconds, okay. So my teta, basically, she was born in Jerusalem, and she was a daughter of 13. And in her early years, her father, in 1948, was shot protecting the old city, and he died. And so he left a mother with 13 kids, no care. And so they didn't know what to do. The mother experienced depression, and so they sent her and one of her brothers to separate orphanages run by nuns. And in that space, she experienced a lot of abuse and a lot of severe, severe trauma. And since then, she did not get to go back home. She went home for a little bit, and they had to send her to Egypt. Then they sent her to Bahrain, then they sent her to Kuwait before she had to get married because of the 1967 war and came here. All this time, she's yearning for family. She has no one to talk to about the trauma she went through. And every night, and I remember this as a kid, she has nightmares and she's screaming in her sleep. My teta died at 60 from, she didn't even make it to 60, from lung cancer, and she never smoked a day in her life. And now her anxiety and her panic attacks carry over to my mother, and they carry over to all the generations after that. So just to wrap up, the women are doing so much important work, and they're also carrying the weight of the symptoms of ethnic cleansing.
Thank you, Zeina. All right, our second question is for Faisal. And to the next question, how can you cut it? We're doing this for you guys that we can keep afloat. Faisal, can you describe the impact on your family and homes lost in Gaza? I know you mentioned it a little bit in your introduction. And the long-term effects on Palestinians of Palestine and of the diaspora, i.e. long-term trauma, children, the extended rebuilding process with no promise of an enduring peace. And you have 4 minutes for this question.
Yeah, it's catastrophic. You know, we have other people from Gaza who are sitting in the crowd right now with family members from Gaza. People have moved 3, 4, 5, 6 times because of intense bombings, because of, you know, the lack of safety, because of the lack of a shelter. Gaza's skies are 24/7 occupied. You know, we hear F-16s here in Fresno all the time, and those things are loud, but we hear them passing by. In Gaza, that's a 24-hour thing, yet the only difference is, over there, they drop bombs. Israel uses a sneaky tactic of doing the most intense bombings at night, because there hasn't been electricity in Gaza for 11 months. You know, if you talk to anybody from Gaza nowadays, it is the most awkward conversation you could ever have. You don't know what to say, and they don't know what to tell you. The suffering is so extensive, that nobody has any words to describe it anymore. We have a generation, Gaza is full of kids, Gaza is full of children. We have a generation that has spent 11 months in a genocide. And you know, one of the panelists here spoke how the Holocaust has affected generations because of how severe things were. Gaza children, what they're going through right now, are you going to be able to help them? Do you think it's going to be easy to take that trauma out of that child? What Gaza has been going through for 11 months is unprecedented. The amount of bombing that Gaza has been going through is unheard of. 80,000 pounds of bombs have been dropped into Gaza. That has not happened to any city during World War II. What you guys need to understand is a catastrophe has already been created. We're 11 months into a catastrophe. And we need to find a way to make it stop. Because a lot of lives depend on it. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Faisal. My next question is for Antonio. Antonio, you have 3 minutes. Can you share with our crowd today what it means for indigenous peoples here in this land to connect with and stand in solidarity with all other indigenous peoples and their movements?
Yes, thank you, Reza. And as I was saying in my introduction of how, as a Chicano indígena, the evolution, before your eyes indeed, and there's our peoples in Fresno. And even as I grew up after coming back from Vietnam, I had to meet with my own people to understand what was going on in the movement. But as Chicanos, then we were involved in international solidarity struggles, even in the 70s, with the overthrow in Guatemala that happened there, and the overthrow in Chile, and then immediately these wars in rapid succession going on all throughout the world. In fact, there's over 100 conflicts going on and more around the world. But our learning of these struggles, including in Iran and Tehran, and during the hostage taking back in 77, 78, and on through that, we learned these struggles as Chicanos from Fresno and the Valley have gone to Cuba in the Venceremos Brigade in 68, and has been involved in El Salvador, in the struggle in El Salvador, their civil rights, have been involved in Nicaragua and their revolution and civil war. They're my relatives. So as Chicanos, we've gone through a awakening, a consciousness and political awakening, and strategizing where we fit in as 40 million Latinos of this here in the Southwest and the U.S. Because the world community knows who we are as Chicanos, knew who we were as Chicanos, and we are the largest minority indeed in the entire Western Hemisphere, the largest of peoples, and we have a strong economic base. We are still struggling for self-determination, and that is to determine our economy, and to determine our education, and how we're going to proceed from there in line with the other international movements. So myself, in the American Indian movement, it's intertribal. It welcomed Chicanos, and through the American Indian movement as a spiritual movement, because that's what it is, a spiritual movement, have been working hand in hand with the Chicanos and vice versa. We're learning together of our indigenousness. My work at the international arena includes the completion of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of the World's Indigenous Peoples. This was adopted by the General Assembly in 2010, and 4 countries did not sign it at first. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and the United States was the last country to sign this Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that I helped be a part of engineering 35 years of that work in the international arena. And Article 6 of the 46 articles in that Declaration on the Rights of the World's Indigenous Peoples refers to self-determination. Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. We see the Palestinians as indigenous peoples to their land. Indeed, we say we are the Palestinians of North America, and they are the indigenous peoples of Palestine.
Thank you. The next question is for Seth. Seth, how can your organizations and progressive members of the Jewish community collaborate with movements in the United States to stop the flow of weapons to Israel? You got 3 minutes.
You know, the reality is that too many Americans, too many of my friends and family, of your friends and family, don't really understand what's going on. You know, as I'm out and about going through my day, and I tend to wear shirts like this, people will ask me, what is this going on? Why are people so upset about it? Why are students on campus risking arrest? And the bottom line is that we have to build our power, and we have to do it together. I mean, it's wonderful that each of us here on this panel works with a different organization. And each organization has its mission and its goals, which is fine, but we have to come together. We have to come together in elections. We have to come together in pressuring our elected officials. We have to tell our senators, our congressmen, our state legislators that we are not going to stand for blind support of Israel. Whatever organization or mechanism you choose to work with is wonderful. But make sure that that organization is standing up for Palestine. You know, when we get together within JVP and with allies and we talk about the situation, there are so many people in government, in politics, in activism, who call themselves progressive. But what they are is what we call PEP. Progressive Except Palestine. Wherever you're involved, in a social club, in a religious institution, in your work, in your schools, tell people, speak up, talk. It's not always easy. They're going to be afraid of anti-Semitism, but you have to tell them that we as Americans must stop this. I have another 30 seconds, so let me add a quick commercial. There are 3 bills in Sacramento designed to discriminate against Palestinians. Our legislators have passed those bills. The governor must veto them. Get on the phone, get online, tell the governor that he must veto 3 bills. AB 2925, SB 1277, and SB 1287. SB 2925, I'm sorry, AB 2925, SB 1277, and SB 1287.
So whoever asked that question, I'm just going to put your question to the side. Somebody asked about those 3 bills.
We have to tell Ana Caballero, Senator Ana Caballero, and
All right.
Representative Joaquin Aranda.
We will. I hope all the people in here are going to do the same. Joshua, you have 4 minutes. Can you speak briefly on the effects that you and other veterans have experienced as a result of the ongoing U.S. involvement in wars in the Middle East?
All right, thank you for the question. Effects of Middle East wars on veterans. A lot we could talk about there. Probably the biggest thing that comes to mind is the 22 a day. If anybody's familiar with that phrase, that's the the rate of veteran suicides. This is the idea that every day an average of 22 veterans take their lives. That number is down a little bit. I think last year it was down to something like 17. Still a high number. There's the legacies of things like traumatic brain injuries, cancers, and all sorts of things related to exposure to various toxins. There's, of course, post-traumatic stress, something that people are pretty aware of. And of course, the effects of post-traumatic stress on veterans is a huge issue, no doubt about that. But while these things are important and should be important to American society, these things are far, far worse for the people on the other end of these wars. And so, you know, I appreciate the question, but I for one think that the stormtroopers of the American empire shouldn't necessarily be centered in any of these discussions. Yeah, and you know, it's the like I said, the people on the receiving end of imperial violence that really ought to be centered. You know, veterans are, in many respects, also victims of a war machine. Absolutely. When one comes to realize, especially, you know, joining up with lofty ideals and things like that, and then you come to realize that your job is making foreign lands safe for resource extraction at the behest of wealthy corporations. General Smedley Butler, he was the most decorated Marine in history at one time, talked about that we are hired muscle. We are gangsters for capitalism. And so one profound effect that I think does bear mentioning as it relates to veterans is something called moral injury. It's something that post-traumatic stress is often talked about, but moral injury is something that's beginning to get spoken about in widespread circles. And moral injury is the idea that it's sort of the psychological or the spiritual aftermath of taking part in things that go against our basic human morality. And even for those who don't take direct part in the violence, but know that you're playing a role, in these terrible outcomes. This can be very difficult, especially when you're regarded by society as a hero and you're thanked profusely. Oh, thank you for what you did. That can be very disconcerting. You know, leads to a lot of cognitive dissonance. And so the moral injury that I'm speaking about, this is exactly what many of us gathered earlier this year to talk about with respect to Aaron Bushnell. If anyone remembers the young man in the Air Force who self-immolated in protest, only he didn't, you know, what he did with his moral injury, he made a spectacle out of it, but regardless of how we might feel about that. He didn't destroy himself privately the way that a lot of folks do. He set out to expose the true cost of war and to make it a point that we see that up close. So anyway, it all underscores this overarching idea that the effects of Middle East wars on veterans is bad, and it's not good. It's bad for U.S. service members and veterans, and it's far, far worse for the people on the other end of this violence. And I will say, younger military folks especially are recognizing this in far greater numbers, as I mentioned. And so I wish more would turn that awareness into action, but we're working on that.
Thank you, Josh. The next question is for Seth, and you have 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Well, you got 3 last time, and you took less than 3. What is your position on the influence? I don't know how you do this in 4 minutes. What is your position on the influence of the Israel lobby on the U.S. Congress and multiple administrations?
Let me start by saying that there are more Christian Zionists in the U.S. than there are Jewish Zionists. So we are not talking about only the Jewish people, but they have used our system. And you know, we often talk about the NRA and how evil it is and how many legislators it controls. And frankly, the Zionist lobby, AIPAC, and many other organizations, because AIPAC is only one of them, use the system very well. If somebody wants to run for the school board or for a local city office, a group of Zionists will approach you. They'll talk to you about what you care about, why you're running, but they will also say, you know, anti-Semitism is a terrible problem. Will you work with us to fight anti-Semitism and support Israel? And if that candidate says yes, all of a sudden checks are written, people go knock on doors, people support them. When that city councilman, a few years later, runs for Congress or to go to Sacramento, those same friends came back and say, oh, you know, you've been so great on city council and you've been supporting the Jewish people, so we're going to mobilize our community for you. Now, I know that many people, especially younger people, have given up on electoral politics. It's dirty, it's horrible, but it works. And so what I would say is get involved. I mean, in congressional primaries this year, 2 wonderful members of Congress, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, were defeated in primaries by AIPAC and other Zionist groups. In the millions and millions of dollars that they spent to defeat these wonderful people, Israel was never mentioned. The commercials didn't say, Cori Bush doesn't support Israel. They said, Cori Bush is ineffective, Cori Bush hasn't served her community, Cori Bush is not representing you. Now that's all, I could use a much stronger word, garbage. In those 2 primaries, they spent more money than has ever been spent in congressional primaries in the history of U.S. 15 million that we know of. That's not counting the dark money against Jamal Bowman, because it was in New York, which is a very expensive media market. For Cori Bush in the Midwest, they only had to spend $9 million. Now think of that, what that $9 million could do for the unhoused, what could do for so many other charities. We have to get out and organize, and we have to build that power the same way, because it's the only way.
Thank you, Seth. Our next question is for Faisal, and you have 3 minutes. How do you observe the response on the part of solidarity movements in the United States and other countries? So how do you see those folks that are allies in solidarity?
We've had some great wins. Yeah. You know, we've had great wins. We've had large numbers show up to protests and events and city council and hounding people towards sympathizing and, you know, stopping the weapons supply and, you know, cutting the funding to Israel. We've had great wins. But those numbers are dying down. You know, our protest at the beginning of that happens every Saturday, at the beginning of this genocide, we used to get a couple of hundred. Now we're lucky if we get to 30. I know people get tired. I know life gets through things. I know, you know, sometimes you see stuff that you don't like and you're like, you know what, I'm not going to go to the protest because of this or that. That genocide is so much bigger than any of what you went through, no offense. What I'm trying to tell you here is when we had a lot of pressure, when we made a lot of pressure, we were getting somewhere. Zeina talked about the new military operation that's happening in the West Bank. And Janine, do you know how Israel started? They cut off the electricity and water from hospitals. You know why they did that? Because they did it in Gaza and they were like, oh, we're able to do that. They torched down a Shifa hospital. After they left that place, Palestinians found mass graves. Do you understand what it's like to find mass graves in the 21st century? And then our White House comes out and says, oh, we're investigating. They've taken us and replaced us with these empty vessels that are incapable of changing any policy. 11 months! So, our response was good initially, but now, we're not doing enough. There's a genocide going on. 40,000 Palestinians dead. 17,000 children dead. A few hundred babies that were born died during this war. I don't necessarily think that people should either go to protests or come to these events or whatever, but you should do something. Find something and do it. And if you're not doing anything right now, you're failing Palestinians. Thank you.
Thank you, Faisal. Joshua. Dr. Joshua, can you summarize the relevant laws and protocols that provide the legal framework for a campaign to end the shipment of weapons to Israel? 3 minutes.
Well, as many of us probably know, the Israeli regime is only able to get away with this and to enjoy this impunity because the U.S. sends them weapons and munitions unconditionally. My own doctoral dissertation looked at U.S. military aid relationships and the conditions placed on it. It looked at a different part of the world in East and Central Africa. But I can tell you, the U.S. has a bad track record of arming regimes that violate human rights. That's no secret. That's been the case for a very long time. But there still have always been some minimum standards. The U.S. constantly violates the spirit of many of these laws, but they're careful to take a little action so that they're not technically violating the spirit, the letter of the law. So they violate the spirit but not the letter of the law. But with Israel, it's a very different circumstance. There have been no conditions, no limitations placed on any of this aid. And this is in the face of some of the most brutal and depraved acts imaginable. And it's so well documented. But yeah, so make no mistake, this is 100% a clear violation of many laws. It's not a question, and many of these laws have overlapping scopes, legally speaking. So just to run down what some of these are, we've got the conventional arms transfer policy, which is a federal policy prohibiting U.S. weapons transfers that will be used to breach the Geneva Conventions. You got the Foreign Assistance Act, which forbids military assistance going to governments that engage in human rights violations. You got the Arms Export Control Act, which says that countries that receive U.S. military aid can only use this weaponry for legitimate self-defense and internal security. It's long been established by international law. The Israelis are an occupying force, and by definition, the worst of their actions are not defensive. So that's a clear violation. You've got the U.S. War Crimes Act, forbidding, again, weapons transfers that facilitate specific war crimes. So the law is crystal clear. And then perhaps most famously, you've got what are called the Leahy laws, or the Leahy Amendment, which prohibits providing military aid to specific military and security forces units. in foreign militaries where there's credible evidence of human rights violations. And then finally, you've got the Genocide Convention Implementation Act, which implements our obligations under the Genocide Convention. And so all of this is to say there's no denying what's going on. The violations are clear. The U.S. is engaging in clear criminal actions. It's not just members of the military who are speaking out. We've had high-profile resignations, for example, from within the State Department and other various federal agencies that see that this is clear-cut criminality. And so that legal framework, for this campaign does exist. It's just a matter of following through. When that spigot of lethal aid is turned off, this genocide runs out of gas, and that's the only thing keeping this going is the sort of might makes right mentality that the U.S. pushes throughout the world. So it's that global predominance of U.S. military and economic power that's the linchpin. And so that needs to be the thing we go after. So a lot of work needs to be done in terms of movement building to facilitate that. But like I said, the legal framework is there.
Thank you, Joshua. Our next question is for Antonio. Antonio, what kind of movement building can be done on an international scale to halt weapons manufacturing and sales to states such as Israel, which is systematically using them to oppress people and even commit genocide and ethnic cleansing? You have 4 minutes.
Well, thank you. And to the question, indeed we have a formidable challenge ahead of us, as my brother, the doctor, was alluding to the military industry and the strength of the military, which should be a primary focus for us as a peoples. And there are well over 800 U.S. military bases around the world. The United States having 3 times, 4 times, 5 times the largest military budget in the world, far surpassing even the UK or even China. So it's a formidable struggle there, my relatives. And humanitarian law, international law, is in shambles, my relatives. We recently heard in July the decision rendered by the International Court of Justice about the violations that the Israelis have incurred, including violation of further settlements in the area there, and still these violations occur. So alliance building, coalition building, as we move forward, as we do in the American Indian movement in our struggles, we try to bring everybody on board here at the home bases, protecting sacred sites and like that. But it's coalition building, alliance building, and also the boycotts, for example, the boycott, divestment, and the sanctions movement is having an impact. So as a people, we should become more aware of the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, and advocate for that, strengthen that. Also, the exposing people who talk one way and act another. Like sometimes we hear about Senator Alex Padilla. He's so good on this and that, but he hasn't said anything about ceasefire in Palestine. So we have to scrutinize people like that. Even countries is the #1 European country in Europe that is first on recognizing Palestinian rights, even statehood for Palestine. But it was just exposed that Ireland has a business corp, multinational business corporation there, Etsy, I believe it's called. Etsy, and they do like Airbnbs and home economies, and they are the financial accountants for the Israeli settlements in the rural areas there in Israel, and they're providing the means for that to exist, so that has to get shut off. Also another boycott and has worked, and that is the AXA, multinational financial company that runs on insurance possibilities. They have been, through the movement of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions, they have pulled out of Israel, so they are no longer providing the financial accountability to Israel and like that. So these movements are very important for us to get involved in, and particularly for the Chicano peoples to educate ourselves, know more about these struggles and get involved and be a part of the march, because it's only us out on the streets that can make the difference. Thank you.
And our final crafted question of the evening is for Zeina. Zeina, how do you feel about the response of both the Fresno community and the national scene in the ongoing genocide of Palestine? 3 minutes.
It is a mix of emotions. For Fresno specifically, I'm very proud of us in a lot of ways. We did so much that really surprised me, honestly. People came together, they had conversations, we had multiple organizing meetings, people were getting groups together for phone banking for our local reps. We had a whole campaign against Jim Costa, we raised the flag, a group got multiple ceasefire resolutions in the Valley passed, which is huge, and thank you to everyone that worked on that. Yes, seriously important. And we've also been protesting almost every single Saturday and now Wednesday for nearly a year. Those are big feats and not easy to do in a city that doesn't necessarily support progressive politics, especially progressive Palestinian politics. And on the national front, I'm extremely proud too of all the efforts that I've seen the Palestinian youth movement do, Al-Auda, the BDS movement. They have boycott, divestment, and sanctions. They have large campaigns that they're working on, but then it's also sparked the populace to create their own BDS campaigns, like against Starbucks or McDonald's. These are big, big things, and places like Starbucks, their economy is tanking because of BDS. And like he was saying, BDS is extremely important, and I was going to talk about that a little bit. It was one big reason why apartheid in South Africa ended, for the most part. I mean, there's still a lot of issues there as well, but it made huge advances in South Africa, and there are lots of BDS campaigns going on right now that we can still be a part of to make a big difference. So on one end, I'm very proud, and then on the other end, like Faisal, I see some of the support waning, and I see people getting tired, and I see people getting scared. And I understand, I've felt a lot of those things as well, but also like Faisal, none of my feelings will ever compare to seeing a kid's limbs get blown off or a mass grave being found. So some ways that you can get involved, like I said, even these small communities are so important. First, you can educate yourself. Go read The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine by Ilan Papp. Read The 100 Years War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. If you like fiction that contextualizes the occupation, you can read Mornings in Jenin, Salt Houses, there's a book club happening. If you like documentaries and you want to learn more about the women's movement, you can watch Naila and the Uprising. If you're very new to this, you can watch Occupation 101. Join the protests. There's one on Wednesday by Raza for Gaza at 11 to 1 and 2500 Tulare Street every Wednesday. There's the same one on Blackstone and Knees from 6 to 8 every Saturday. Join the Bires movement personally. You can get apps like the No Thanks app or the Boycott or BitNash app to tell you what not to buy. The money goes to Israel. We can form BDS campaigns here. We can find a local vendor, like Trader Joe's, for instance, right, where they're selling Israeli za'atar, for example. We can be out there every Saturday educating people that are walking into Trader Joe's, that what they're buying is going towards the ethnic cleansing of Palestine and the genocide of Gaza. And you can pressure your local representatives as well, like Seth was talking about. So thank you very much.
So let's give a larger, more loud and thunderous round of applause for all of the panelists this evening. But we're not done yet. We're not done. All right. So much good was said tonight. So much power was in this room tonight. How many of you felt a little bit of power this evening? How many of you felt a little bit powerful this evening? How many of you felt like, if I can come here and I can do this and I see everybody else around me willing to do something, that we can make some change? I don't feel it. How many of you think you can make some change? I want to give you two quotes that I love from Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, Brother Malcolm X. Number one, he says what? He says that we're not outnumbered, we're just out-organized. I don't care what side of the political aisle you fall on. I don't care what religion you attest to. I don't care your ethnic or your racial, your background. I think at the end of the day, none of us want to see people being blown to smithereens, limbs being separated, kids being operated on with no anesthesia. I don't think any human being of any good conscience likes to see this in their lives. And because of that, we have to ask ourselves, why is it then able to continue? We talked about it earlier, $310 billion going to the state of Israel. We're out organized. We need to figure out ways that we can continue and sustain movements against not just calling out what Israel is, but what we're doing. Because you and I are responsible for this genocide right now. And number two, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz said what he said. If you stick a knife in my back 9 inches and pull it out 6, that's not progress. If you pull it all the way out, that's not progress. Progress is by healing the wound made by the blow. And then he says, but so many people won't even acknowledge that the knife is there. And when I think about this genocide in Gaza, when I think about the last 76 years in Palestine, I think about the people who think that we already pulled the knife out 6 inches, you're good. And I think about other people who are like, we pulled the knife out, what more do you want? And I think about all the people who have yet to heal the wound that they've made by the blows. What else can we do? And I think about the average person who's like, there's no knife in your back. I think that's where we're at. We need to recognize the knife that's shoved in the back. We need to pull it all the way out. We need to heal those wounds. And it's not going to happen until we step out of what we think we need to be and end not just the genocide, because that's not enough. Not just for a ceasefire, because that's not enough. The existence of a Zionist, ethno-Western colonial state cannot exist in this 2024. No ethno-state should have the right to exist as is. That doesn't mean that people don't have the right to exist. But an ethno-state? And for any of your friends that would like to say, oh, you're anti-Semitic if you talk bad about Israel, I would ask you, am I anti-Muslim? Am I Islamophobic when I talk about Saudi Arabia? Am I Hindu-phobic if I talk about Modi in India? No. Keep talking. Keep talking. Because whatever they want to label it at, we know what it is. It's justice talk.
It's righteous talk. It's righteous anger. And that righteous anger needs to move us to organize, move, act, think, and react in a way that's going to end the genocide and end the suffering of the people of Palestine. This is a universal stand against imperialism. And until we understand it as such, and until we ally as such, we're going to keep losing. And I'm tired of losing. What about you? I'm tired of losing. Poet, why don't you honor me with a little bit of free Palestine? Free Palestine! Say it, free Palestine! Free Palestine! Say free Gaza! Free Gaza! Say free Gaza! Free One more! Say free Palestine! Free Palestine! And let me get Gloria up here to bring up our poet.
He told me just say my name, but I can't. Adi is a volunteer for one of my groups, Mothers Helping Mothers. We collect personal need items and donations for farm workers during the drought. And we take it out, and we have even gone to the refugee camps in Tijuana. And that's where I witnessed her sitting there crying. And you all know me, right? Get your ass up. Help me. You can't cry right now. There's a revolution going on. We don't have time for tears, because we have to keep moving forward. And we have to stand up and say no to the violence, to the genocide. When I called Adid and I said, I need you to write a poem. And when I called her, it was almost 2 months ago, and I told her, it's almost like a woman that's pregnant is giving birth. What is she giving birth to? Her response was a global revolution. And that is Adid. And I want you to listen to her words, and I promise you will cry. Thank you.
Gracias. Thank you, brothers and sisters in La Lucha, because that's where we are. I want to thank Gloria. I mean, I did tell her, no, just say my name. I practice. Aquí estoy bien. Hola, ahora sí, ¿cómo estamos? Una Palestina libre. I practice floricanto, and that's what I'm bringing tonight. It isn't an academic version of poetry. It isn't spoken word. It isn't whatever you might envision what poetry is, or what the Western world has told us that poetry is. This is our indigenous tradition as creating ceremony with word. And this is an appropriate, I had to think about it. Is this appropriate? And I said, yes, this is appropriate, because I'm here to create bonds with us, con nuestra gente, with your gente, so we can fight a good fight. Porque tiene que salir del amor. El amor a la patria, el amor al barrio, el amor a la gente, el amor a la familia. Like the sister said here, it's the women with the strong backbones and the big hearts who walk forward in this revolution. And that is what Floricanto is. It's just heart. So this is just my offering to all of you. Ofrezco mi corazón por la libertad de la gente palestina, a lullaby for the newborns of Palestine. Someone whispered the first verse in my ear. A la ruru mi niña, a la ruru mi niño, a la rurura. Sueña mi amor Cachito de mi corazón sueña la libertad. Dormido está el mundo que no lucha por tu paz. Perdido está el mundo que se ciega a la verdad. Tus tatarabuelos reclaman nuestra falta en protegerte del genocidio de 7 décadas. 7 décadas. Was it not the 7th generation that was coming to save us? 7 décadas. And we have not stood up strong enough. Or maybe we have been joined at the heart and the umbilical cord and are now just awakening to it. Despierta, levanta tu canto, esta es una sola lucha. It has always been one fight. Palestina merece su tierra, tú mereces tu tierra. La madre es de nosotros y de todos. Y ya está al final el tiempo de los gobiernos que quieren abarcar el mundo. Oh, they steal cribs and they steal mothers at the doors of hospitals whose only crime is to sing lullabies with bullets in their backs. A la ruru, mi nene, a la rurura. Cachito de mi corazón, aquí está tu hogar. Soy la madre que no sabes que tienes, al niño que quedó enterrado en la tumba de un hospital. I am also there with you, taking care of your little body at the cribs of abandoned hospitals left in haste behind bombs. I am all mothers when I touch the Mother Earth. Somos una sola familia. Esta es simplemente una canción de mi corazón. A la ruru, mi nene. This is also a lullaby for the grandfathers and the grandmothers and the great aunts and the great uncles who had their land stolen decades ago, who had to watch their baby olive trees ripped from the ground, who had to leave behind furnishings and photographs and names and bodies and hearts and memories. It is a struggle to find a birthday cake in a refugee camp. It is a struggle. It is always a struggle. Los pasteles siempre faltan at borders. Borders are engraved in my very belly. Y ahora estoy dando a luz, and we give birth with great warriors of great heart who lead us, and we follow just as we would with our families. Liberty to all people and free Palestine.
Thank you so much for those powerful words. We have quite a few questions up here. I tried to separate them as to what maybe wasn't answered already. So forgive me if I don't ask your question. And I want somebody from the committee to tell me how many minutes do we have for questions total? Even though we're late?
No, it's only 7:45.
Okay, so are we good?
Yeah, she gave me till 9 and then we can clean up.
All right, so we'll go for a half hour. We'll go through these questions, and then if you have questions, you want to stand up and just ask, you don't have to write it. No problem. Before we do that, though, I do want to, again, I did it at the beginning, and I want to recognize those organizations that make up the Fresno Peace Coalition. And I want us to recognize these organizations that they put their money where their mouth was. They decided that they wanted to put something together, not just today, every week. So what they did is they decided to gather and to organize and to put their money to put this together and every other program for you. So the Fresno Peace Coalition is made up of, and we can give them recognition as I read each of their names. Not in any particular order. We have the Palestinian Liberation Group. We have the Center for Nonviolence. We have Peace Fresno. We have WILF, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We have Veterans for Peace. We have Rasta Against War. Palestine. Give it up for all of them. All right. So I guess the way I can do this is if the question seems as though it's directed at you, I'll ask it directly of you. But if not, I'll just ask who wants to answer it. And then the more concise your answers are, the longer we have and the more questions we can get through. Fair? Fair game? The first question is directed to you, Seth. Okay? So it says, when you say you are anti-Zionist, how do you define Zionism? Interesting question. Are you against the existence of the state of Israel?
Zionism is a complex term. Within the Old Testament, we talk about and Jews pray for a return to Zion. There is a religious tie. But what we're talking about is political Zionism. The settler colonial project that started in the late 1800s and was supported by European countries and by America. When you get to the question of existence, no country has a right to exist as an apartheid state. No country has a right to commit genocide. A solution has to deal with all the people in the region. They're all entitled to live together in peace.
Thank you, Seth. This is for Faisal. We're action-oriented here. So some prophetic person asked, how can we or how do we send money or food support to Palestine?
So this has been very tough lately. There's no funds or money circulating in Gaza. Sending money to any relatives of mine has been extremely expensive. Unfortunately, you know, we've hit a stage where Israel only allows like 78 trucks every couple of weeks. So there isn't enough to go around. There are organizations that are gathering aid and deal with prosthetics for children, hospitals. There's even Gaza Ministry for Civil Affairs is gathering donations to build roads and, you know, fix the big issue of sewers right now. So there are a lot of avenues. Just open your eyes. I'm not going to specify any one of them because that's not, I don't feel like I'm qualified enough to do that. And I don't want the IRS behind me.
So can I just follow up?
Yeah.
So in a legal way, because I think nobody wants the IRS or the USG to come after them, can you tell us the name of an organization which is reputable that right now can get our money across? Sorry, who said I will? Can I ask him?
Yeah, Yasser.
So Yasser, can you tell us the name of an organization that right now I can give money to that will get it to Palestine and will not create any legal problems for us here in these yet-to-be United States?
It's called the Palestinian American Medical Association, PAMA.
Okay.
It's the only one that you can trust.
So the Palestinian American Medical Association, now does that count food as well, or is it just medical?
Medical cash, whatever you want.
Medical cash, whatever. Aren't they local? Aren't there some local PAMA?
National.
Yeah, but aren't there some people locally?
Yeah.
There are, right? Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I was going to add, the Middle East Children's Alliance has done some great work.
So what you can hear from folks in the crowd is that there are ways to help. So it's not totally shut off from us. All right. I don't know who wants to answer this question, but maybe the first one to jump on it, just tell me you want to answer. What do you think the community in the United States can do to help teachers who are trying to teach about Palestine and are then being targeted? All right, Seth.
Go online or call the governor and tell him to veto SB 1277, which is specifically targeted at giving Zionists more control in our schools.
Also for Fresno specifically, there's a grassroots movement for our ethnic studies program, which is also trying to silence Palestine in the ethnic studies curriculum, which has a lot of issues, and that's one of them. And that's what those bills are about too, but nationally. But so there are grassroots movements here. You can go on Instagram at Fresno Ethnic Studies, and they have meetings regularly. They'll go sit in with our local like Board of Educators. They help give input on who superintendents are going to be for Fresno Unified and things like that. You can find them on Instagram and try to go to their meetings, things like that, and make a difference locally as well.
And you know, that's the second time tonight that those bills have been mentioned. I think you should all have taken notes in your phone or however you keep notes. I will repeat them: AB 2925, SB 1277, and SB 1287. Those three bills need to be shot down because they all would get in the way of teachers who refuse to carry a Zionist narrative.
You have AirDrop. I'll send you a picture with those bills on it.
Do I have AirDrop to take a
I
picture?
literally will
Do you know how to do that?
picture of it. So you have
Oh, you'll do it? Yeah, good.
just go ahead and throw your AirDrop right down.
I will add them tomorrow on the Rasa Against War website.
So check this out. We have a couple things. The young sister midway of she says if you turn on the AirDrop on your phone, she's going to send it to you right now on your phone. Number two, Lori said that she's going to add it to the Rasa Against War website. So tomorrow, anybody who goes there can find those three bills. And guess what? Maybe we've just been given our charge of what we need to organize right now. Right? Yes, sir. Okay, let me ask these three real quick, and then we'll... Go ahead, ask your question. We'll take a break from these questions for a second.
So first, I don't want to step on this road. A Zionist definition is actually anyone who sacrifices anything and anyone for the sake of the state of Israel. And that's evident in our politicians. They are sacrificing our lives for the sake of the state of Israel. So that's the definition of a Zionist. The second question I have, or point, is...
So rather a point, if it's not a question, can we save it till later? It's a question.
You guys were mentioning about AIPAC supporting our politicians. And has any of you come up with an idea on how to sanction and boycott those politicians and vote in politicians that actually care for us? For example, like Mayor Santos of Madeira, who went out of his way to risk his future reputation.
He doesn't even know you're talking about him back there.
No, I'm saying, is there like a group or an effort or an effect?
So were you all able to hear that? Okay, so Yasser is asking that that multiple times this evening there has been mention of AIPAC and its support for certain politicians, and then he said what can be done to either get rid of them, sanction them, whatever it may be, as well as get people into office. And he mentioned, I mean, we're not 501s, so he mentioned Santos Garcia this year, the mayor in Madera, who sacrificed possibly his political future by doing the right thing. Fighting to make sure that Central Valley, that it was one of the first places around the country in Madera to pass a ceasefire resolution under his watch. So the question was for any of you, whoever would like to take this question, what can be done for us as a people to organize in a way to sanction, punish, and remove those who are bow to AIPAC? And I like what Seth said earlier, also talking about Christian Zionism. There's 7.5 million paid members of CUFI, right? So we got to be worried about CUFI as much as, if not more than, AIPAC. But what can we do to punish them, sanction them, or to get people into power that will, and it's not about Mayor Santos being with us. It's about Mayor Santos being with all the people, right? He's with all the people. We don't want somebody who just stands with us and ignores everybody else. So who would like to take on that very difficult and loaded question?
Take a stab at it.
Okay.
I think it all starts locally. There was a story in the past elections which were terrible in my opinion. And there was a polling place where you can vote, you know, very close to it. There were more than 30 people that I know on varying degrees. And I asked, has anybody casted their vote tonight? None of them did. I told them, anybody is willing to cast their vote tonight. You know, the genocide was ongoing when we had the elections. There were no takers. In local politics, every vote counts. We're just a couple of thousand in a district, a few thousand here and a few thousand there.
Yeah, that's right.
You and your circle, you make a huge difference. You're feared locally. Our mayor feared us when we went every week to the city hall to tell him how much of a crappy job he did.
Yep.
But then, when people take elections lightly, and people like him win, it sends a very bad signal. We can't follow up.
That's right.
So, you want to know how you can start endorsing politicians and kicking the AIPAC corruption out of our system? Get involved in your local politicians. Get involved in the school districts. Don't let AIPAC groom them to becoming senators and presidents. Because once they get this far,
That's right. It's too late.
it's too late.
Beautiful. Another really great question. It's going to seem like a simple question, but I think this is something that is something we all should know, because when I ask this question, I'm asking it from the perspective of how we can do this for our Palestinian siblings, but I think we got to learn it for everybody. We have to know what it means to stand up for everybody when anybody is under attack. So the question is, what does it look like to be an ally? And I think they particularly mean to the Palestinian siblings, but I don't know how you want to take that. So who would like to answer what it looks like to be an ally? You take it?
Okay, so we talked about a few ways that you can act. This event was put together by a coalition of different groups that Reza mentioned. That is one huge way of being an ally. It's groups getting together with other groups to organize for each other groups, every group's cause. And this is also the real reason why all of us are here, because what's happening in Palestine, as we know, is not isolated to Palestinians. It's not just some group of people from across the world that you've never met personally and have no ties to that are being killed, and you could live your day knowing it or not knowing it. It's your tax dollars going to it. It's happening in front of your eyes, and there's no response. There's no accountability. If it's happening there, it can happen anywhere. And guess what? It is. It is happening in Sudan. It is happening all over right now. In the Congo, thank you. So, to go back to my question, coalition building is one huge way that you can be an ally, right? When we're fighting for Palestine, we're also fighting for Black lives. We're also fighting for Native American recognition, right? We're fighting for all of the people that have been oppressed. And one of the biggest ways to start, and I promise when you start this way, you will find your other avenues, is really just educating yourself and talking to people around you. Talk to your coworkers about what you've been learning. Talk to your family. That's always the hardest place to start. So once you start there, you will figure out other ways to be an ally. Fresno is small, but we are growing activist groups. And it really takes people like you that are coming out on a Saturday that are, energized and curious to have those conversations, and the organizing will begin from there.
So I've been given an important note. In just about 5 weeks, we come up on the 1-year anniversary of this current war on Gaza. We're almost at October 7th. Can you believe that? Remember, they want you to think the world started on October 7th, so it was only almost a year ago. Gloria, hold up your hand. Where are you at right now? Well, I don't know if everybody, there's some new folks in here. Hold your hand up, Gloria. This is Gloria. First, give Gloria a hand. If you don't know Gloria is one of the longest real hardcore organizers in Fresno. She when it comes to organizing, she's been doing it. So she wants me to remind you to make sure, and because especially now that the crowd's starting to thin out, we've been together for about 3.5, almost 3 hours. So before you go, if you're interested in thinking of what it looks like to be in a coalition, to build a movement to honor in a weird way, to organize in a way to change our trajectory as we reach October 7th, because we're going to have to ramp up as we come into these days. So if you're interested in being a part of that, do not leave without giving Gloria your information. Okay? She will only charge you like $20 on your credit card and you'll be good. But other than that, make sure you don't leave without signing up. Okay, the next question is a very good one. We're at a very weird time, right? We're just a couple of months away from these elections. And it's really hard for us to think about what does it mean to check a box and who we are. And we have 2 candidates that are on the top of the bill. One of them that is the vice president during this genocide, who has said that she will do everything she can to defend Israel's right to exist and defend themselves and all of those tropes, or whatever they are, that we've been fed. And on the other side, we have somebody who said that the first day he gets into power, he's going to get rid of, what is it called? To deport anybody that's critical of the state of Israel. And his vice presidential candidate said, day one, we go in and we finish the job against all of Gaza. Neither of them are good decisions. So the question here is interesting, because I don't know if BDS talks about who to vote for. But somebody asked, does BDS include boycotting Trump and Harris and instead voting for a name? But I'm not even going to say the name because there's many people running. Does BDS have a position on boycotting from electing Miss Genocide, Vice Genocide, or the one who will come and do worse, supposedly?
No, they don't.
Does anybody know? Well, yeah, we got somebody that
Well, don't work for them, but I'm proud to work with them. The BDS movement is a Palestinian-led local civic leaders, and therefore they do not get into electoral politics.
I will be voting uncommitted, so I am personally. Yeah, I mean, there are lots of ways to get involved. We talked about them so many, and unfortunately, a candidate for presidency right now isn't one of them, in my opinion, for more reasons than just Palestine, to be honest. Yeah, boycotting does include more than just economic boycotts. I know there was a big youth movement to boycott all of the celebrities that either have been like pro-Israel, Zionists, or not speaking out about Palestine at all. So you can boycott the arts as well, because a big way that the Zionist movement indoctrinates people is through film, music, TV. So yeah, boycotting does involve more than just what you buy. And for me personally, I'll be boycotting those.
The one thing I would want to add, whatever you decide to do at the top of the ticket, think about the bottom of the ticket. Go meet with all the candidates, whatever local races you have. I'm not from this area, I don't know what races there are, but city councils, school board, county leadership, go meet with the candidates and confront them. Confront them with Palestine, and then, based on that, decide where to vote.
Dr. Shurley, this question is for you. These difficult conversations around Palestine and American imperialism with our families while having multiple members joining the service.
Well, probably a good way would be just to frame it, in terms of what's in their best interest. What's in the best interest of those family members, right? Those family members that are joining the service. Yeah, I mean, this is a tough one because we talked about that earlier, right? We're conditioned, we're thoroughly indoctrinated in many ways to accept the proposition that to serve in the military means you must be all in for these projects, support for Israel and a whole host of other things. But that's just not the case. Most of a lot of the desire for young people to join the military in the first place isn't so much. I mean, sometimes maybe there's some nationalism, some ideals, but usually it's economic reasons. How else are you going to get health care? How else are you going to get education? These are things that we don't afford to everybody in our society. So we create this situation where we incentivize people to go out and do these criminal acts around the world. It's what we end up becoming a part of. So just framing it in that perspective. I would add, if I was talking to somebody, and I've had conversations like this actually with relatives and young people who are making that decision, and some of them do choose to. A few relatives who are on active duty right now. Some of whom, a year or two later, they kind of come back and say, "Yeah, I see what you meant. I understand now what you meant." And so just beating that drum and not falling for this idea just refuse to fall for this idea that patriotism means blind obedience. Was it Thomas Paine who said the dissent is the highest form of patriotism? we have to dissent, and we have to dissent on behalf of the members of the military. These are young people. These are often very impressionable, usually teenagers or people in very young adulthood, and they're going through a difficult time in their life. They're figuring out who they are, and the material benefits are hard to deny. Like I mentioned, the healthcare, the education, job skills, all that kind of stuff. But we must not fall for this idea that it means blind obedience. Let's just frame it that way.
Thank you. All right.